Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and welcome to a new month on Patreon in our Hollywood Icons theme. So this month we are doing a new take on one of my favorite movie dresses ever, and that is the hot pink off-the-shoulder keyhole wiggle dress that Marilyn Monroe wore in the movie Niagara from 1953. Now you may recognize this design from me because I did a version of this for Butterick many moons ago, and I'm really excited to bring it to Charm and have the opportunity to update it with my newfound wisdom after all these years, and of course also with our very inclusive sizing and cup sizing. So we've pretty much started from scratch on this version, and I'm really proud of where we've come on this one. This has a nice off the shoulder, it's a little lower and wider and deeper than our Lisa bodice neckline, but we're going to give you a lot of tips and tricks to stabilize the neckline and also elastic to hug the shoulders to keep it on. It has a really beautiful keyhole and knot at center front. It's fully lined. We've added boning to the midriff because that really helps support the keyhole. And best of all, this is now in our L'Amour series. So you have more than a dozen bottoms to choose from to mix and match this bodice with. So you'll see from our samples that I really love the boardwalk skirt, the slim skirt, to get that Marilyn Niagara feel. But there are so many other things you can do, including shorts, pants, full skirts. Just really, I would love to see you go wild and use your imagination on this one because it looks great with a lot of different silhouettes. And I know that one of our most requested things from the Butterick version was that people wanted a version without the keyhole. And so I'm excited to tell you that if you're in a bonus tier, you are going to really like what we are releasing on the 15th of this month. And you might get another sleeve option as well. So I really hope you love this new version. We're going to get right into talking about the pattern pieces and then fabric and supplies. Okay, so now we're ready to look at the pattern pieces. As always, we have minimized these down so that you can see them on the tabletop all together. So not a ton of pattern pieces in this one. We have piece number 1 is the keyhole bodice front, and we're saying keyhole bodice to differentiate it from what's coming out on the 15th, just so you know. So this is the keyhole bodice front. You're gonna cut 2 fabric and 2 lining. Keep in mind that if you want to do bra cups in this dress, you can sandwich them in between the outer fabric and the lining on this piece, because it is kind of hard to wear a bra with this dress. I will just let you know right now. This is our apex marking. If you want to do a muslin, I would recommend doing a muslin. So these circles are for gathering at center front. Here, oh my God, what is this? Oh, it's the keyhole. That's for the keyhole. So these 2 circles are really important, okay? So this is where you're going to finish this edge to create the upper edge of the keyhole. And then we have the midriff front, and you are going to cut 1 fabric on fold, 1 lining on fold, and 1 interfacing on fold. Now, this one also has some keyhole circle marks because you finish this edge, this is lined to the edge to create the lower edge of the keyhole. And we have added boning channel marks to this, and those should be transferred to the wrong side of your lining fabric, okay? So there's 1 at center front, there's 1 just below the keyhole, and then there's 1 that goes below the bust apex. You could add additional rows of boning to this dress if you really want to get a ton of support. You could do the side seams, you could do the back, but I feel like this dress doesn't need all of that structure except around the keyhole. So that's why we only put it there. Some important notches to snip. You've got your bodice back, cut 2 fabric, cut 2 lining. And then the midriff back has a princess seam, so it's 2 pieces. You have a midriff center back and a midriff side back, and we've given you a couple sets of notches so that you know which way they go. So if you ever get confused because these pieces can be like easy to flip upside down, just go back to your pattern pieces and check where the notches are. Okay, and then we have our short sleeve. This is the cap sleeve. Very important. You're going to cut one fabric, one lining, and the important thing is that you want to make sure to snip this single notch on the front and the double notch on the back. What? Did I say you cut one? Okay, I'm just talking to Andrea right now. You know John's going to keep this in. Andrea's here, and she's telling me that you should cut two sleeves. What an idea. So you're going to cut two sleeves and two linings on the sleeve piece. And the double notch means it's the back of the sleeve, okay? So that helps you keep them straight. And then finally, you have your knot for the keyhole. You are going to cut two fabric on this one, and it gets seamed along the long edges. For my version, you're going to see I did interface mine because I cut it on the bias and I just didn't want it to stretch. So if you're concerned about stretching, you could also interface one of those pieces. Okay, so that is really it for the pattern pieces. Of course, you're going to need to cut whatever skirt, pants, or shorts you're going to be doing on the bottom. So next we will move on to fabric and supplies. Okay, so now let's get into our recommended fabrics for the Niagara bodice, as well as the supplies that you're going to need. So let's start with fabrics. So I feel like there are a couple different directions that you can go in with this dress. If you look at the original Marilyn dress, and I really do suggest you watch that movie because it's really great, and the way that she moves in this dress and just oozes sensuality, it's really something to see, and you'll see why I love this dress so much. So her version is definitely made in a very drapey fabric that just moves in this sultry way. And so to get that effect, for our pink dress, we used a 4-ply silk crepe with a silk habitai lining. So that combination is really going to give you that very flowy, drapey, bombshell movement, especially when you pair it with the boardwalk slim skirt. Okay, so you don't have to use 4-ply silk crepe because that can be a little expensive, but you could definitely use rayon challis. You could use any sort of synthetic crepe or just something that has a lot of drape to it, okay? So that would be something like this. This is the exact 4-ply crepe that we use. So you can see it has a little bit of beefiness, but it just drapes very beautifully. So that is one direction, okay? But the other direction I really love for this dress is to make it in a crisper fabric with a little more structure and then pair it with a full skirt. So either a gathered skirt or a circle skirt from our L'Amour series. The sarong skirt from the L'Amour series would look great in a crisp fabric. So if you want to do that, then I don't feel like you're going to get the effect that you want with these drapey fabrics. So in that case, I would recommend something like, this is what I'm sewing on camera today. This is a really pretty plaid shirting. It's like a, what do you call this? It's a yarn dyed, oh my gosh. It's a yarn dyed fabric and it has a sort of crispness to it and some structure. Also great for this more structured version would be a linen. I really love this hydrangea one. You can see it has just a little bit of body to it. Satin, if you want to make this a formal dress, would be great. So like rayon, poly, or silk satin. These are all great choices. You're also going to need lining fabrics. So if you're doing this in like a cotton, like I'm sewing today, you can line it in cotton as well. I think that's a great choice for something that's close to your skin. It's going to feel very breathable, especially in the summer. Of course, you can also do, and if you're doing something like a crepe, I would recommend pairing it with a drapier lining fabric, like this synthetic lining fabric, okay? So you have some choices with the lining, but just make sure it's a good match for your outer fabric and the sort of structure that you want in your dress. All right, so supplies, we are going to need some fusible interfacing. You're going to need fusible interfacing yardage for your midriff. But you will also need some fusible interfacing to stabilize your skirt or pants or whatever you're making and your upper bodice at the zipper opening. So you'll need that. Some other stabilizers that you're going to need are twill tape for your neckline and your keyhole. So I believe this one is 3/8 of an inch. You could do a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch. You want it to be pretty narrow, okay? So this stuff is great because you can kind of stretch it slightly and it will really stabilize to that opening. You will also want clear elastic. This is 1/4 inch wide, and this is perfect for sewing into the seam allowance on your sleeves to get it to grip your shoulders. Also, structure for the bodice, we're going to be using spiral steel boning. So you can probably get away with 1 length because it's such short pieces, or maybe 1.5 18-inch lengths. So you're going to need spiral steel boning. You're going to need channeling for your boning. You are going to need some plumber's tape to finish your ends. I'll show you how to do that. And then something to cut your boning with as well. All right, so you know I love these Greenlee 722s. You are going to need thread to match your fabric and your lining. We always use Mettler Metrocene polyester thread. I love this because it's very lint-free and it's also very strong for garments, but any all-purpose polyester thread is what you're looking for. You will need a zipper. So a regular non-invisible zipper, 18 inches, will be perfect for whatever you're pairing this with on the bottom. And then that's it. That's all your supplies. Okay, so that is it for supplies. As always, be sure to check back to the instructions to see the full list and also our full list of fabric recommendations. And so now we're ready to get started sewing. Okay, everyone, we are ready to sew. I'm very excited about this process. This bodice is really fun to sew for me, so it's a little bit different than what we normally do. So hopefully it will get you out of your comfort zone too, and you'll learn some new things. Okay, so first things first, what we're looking at here is my back upper bodice. And just want to note that I have already applied the fusible interfacing, this 1.25 inch strips to the center back opening. For the midriff, you're going to fuse all of your pieces. So the 2 back midriff pieces and the front midriff piece, which means that you don't need to do this treatment on the back midriff piece because it's already stabilized. Also, it's important to transfer this circle. This is where you're going to get that little cute V shape on the midriff. So this is your pivot point. Okay, so we can put these aside for now. What we're going to focus on now actually is the midriff lining. And we're going to be applying boning channels. So we've noticed that this bodice can tend to collapse at this seam unless you give it some support. So boning really helps with any collapsing that you might see on your keyhole. So I really like this feature that we've added. So you can see that I have boning channels marked in. There's one short one that starts below the circle. Okay, this is important because you want to have a nice clean pivot point. And then 4, 5. All right, so on these ones, the ones that aren't the center one, I am going to just apply them top to bottom, raw edge to raw edge, like this. Pin them in place for now. And now on the center one, I'm going to start just below the circle, okay? And when we stitch this one, we are going to pivot at the top and stitch along the top here so that the upper edge of the channel is closed and your bone doesn't pop out. Okay, so now we're going to go to the machine and we're going to edge stitch each side of the boning channels. So 2.5 millimeters is a good width here. And see how the boning channel has just a little bit of a ditch right here? That should help you guide your stitching. do the same thing on the other side. Where possible, I like to stitch in the same direction on both sides of the boning channel because that prevents getting those weird little ripples or drag lines from stitching in opposing directions. Okay, so there's one. This one is obviously the same top to bottom. And the other three are going to be the same except for the center front. So let's do this one together. On this one, we're going to need to stitch from the bottom. Wish I'd put my pins in a different direction, but that's okay. So we're going to start at the bottom on this one. Oops, I got a little thread caught here. There we go. And when you get to the upper corner, you're going to pivot, stitch along the top, pivot again, okay, so I'm going to finish stitching the other three boning channels and then we will move on to the next step. Okay, everyone, so now we are going to be concentrating on the midriff pieces. So grab those. I've got my dress front midriff and then the lining with all the boning channels attached. And I already have prepared, this isn't until the next step, but I'm going to show it in this chapter, just so you know. So I've already prepared the back midriff units, okay? So I've sewn, it's like a princess seam on the back midriff. So I've sewn those together. Be very careful that you're matching notches. This princess seam has a single notch at the top and then a double notch. So, and then the side seam has a single notch, okay? So that's how you know what's what. So I did that for both sides of the back bodice, and I also did it for the lining back midriff, okay? So just put those aside for now if you've already done them. And what we're gonna focus on now is sewing this guy right here, this V, okay? So this forms that cute little V shape on the midriff. So if you look at the Marilyn, the original dress, it has a center front zipper here and then ruching, which causes it to create that V point. I've just never liked the ruching with the zipper, so I wanted to replicate that with this little V shape here. So it's very important that you have all of these marks transferred. So I'm going to, from whichever side you're going to be stitching from. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have them on the wrong side here too. These three circles are what's important, okay? All right, so see, we've got 1, 2, 3. All right, so we are going to put these right sides together, like so. And then we are only going to be stitching between these two circles and pivoting at the center circle. And this is to create a nice finished edge for that midriff keyhole opening. All right, I'm gonna make sure my iron is on, and now let's go to the machine. Okay, do not start at the edge. Start right on that circle, making sure you're at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm gonna start there. I'm gonna backstitch. I'm going to stitch to my pivot circle. And just double check that you're right on it. And once you feel good, actually I'm going to go one more stitch. Once you feel good, now I feel good. Now we're going to pivot, stitch to this circle. Not to the edge, don't keep going. Use your hand wheel if you need to, and then backstitch. Okay, so you can see I've only stitched this little V shape here. Okay, so now we are going to clip to each of those circle points. I'm going to grade these seam allowances. The lining should be narrower and the bodice should be slightly wider. You can also just remove a little bulk from the V-point if you like so. And now we're going to turn this right side out. Okay, so see how we're getting that nice clean point here? That's what we want. If you're seeing any puckering at all, you need to go back and clip closer to your stitching. All right, so I'm turning this right side out. I'm kind of rolling the seam line out to the edge here. And now I'm going to press it flat. A little steam if you need. And make sure these seam allowances are churned all the way out like this at the clip points. Okay, I'm going to clean up those little threads here. Okay. And now we can see how lovely this looks. All right, next thing we're going to do, and this is why I already prepared my midriff backs, is we are going to stitch these right sides together at the side seams. Okay, so you're going to find your notches. So I'm just concentrating on my outer fashion fabric right now. Right there. Right there. And now I'm going to stitch these side seams, keeping the lining free. Press these open. The thing about this bodice is that it looks so crazy at times, like this here, and it's just going to get crazier. So we're in for a wild ride, but it's really cool how it comes together. Okay, so now we have the front midriff completely sewn. And now we're going to do the same thing. Now we're going to do the same thing with the midriff. Sorry, I got confused there. See? It's so easy to get confused. The midriff lining. Why don't we work from the inside here? Right side of the lining. And now right sides together at the side seams of the lining midriff. I feel like side seams are usually one of those things that we do off camera a lot, right? Because it's easy peasy. But on this one, I'm not going to desert you because it just looks different from what we're used to with a side seam. So we'll just sew them all together as a family. Okay, so side seams on the lining sewn, still free from the midriff itself. Okay, so now we can press these open. And now we have a lined midriff unit. And I'm going to put this to the side, and we're going to come back and we're going to be working on the bodice, the upper bodice. Okay, so I forgot to show you one step that you're supposed to do next, which is we are going to stay stitch this lower edge. I would just go from the back to the first boning channel, and then we're just going to clip in and turn this to the right side, or the wrong side, excuse me. And this is going to help us be nice and prepped for the finishing work. All right, so I'm sewing about 1/2 inch, just a little less than 5/8. So I'm going to stop here because I don't actually want to close off those boning channels yet. Okay, so now around this part, sort of between where front princess seam would be and the back princess seam, I'm just going to clip just these curvy parts. About every 1/2 inch is fine. A little more is fine too. Okay, and now we're going to press this up to the wrong side. Okay, so now that is all prepped for our clean finish stitching. At the end, we were going to do a nice hand stitch to conceal the inside of the bodice so it'll look nice and neat. Okay, so now we can move on to the upper bodice. Okay, so we're ready to move on to the bodice, the upper bodice. So these are my two outer bodice pieces, and you can see that I have already stay stitched 1/2 inch in from the neckline at using a 2.5 inch stitch length, and I stitched from the armhole to the center front on each side. Okay, so now we're going to put these aside. We're going to focus on the little keyhole knot. So you can see I cut mine on the bias just because I thought that would be a really cute contrast. So what I did, and this isn't in the instructions, but I did feel like I was going to need to stabilize this because, as you probably know, the bias can stretch a lot, and I didn't want this stretching out and looking skimpy at the center front. So I did use fusible interfacing on the straight grain on one of my keyhole pieces. And now we're going to put these right sides together. And now we're going to stitch along each of these two long edges. so now we can grade these seam allowances. I am going to grade the uninterfaced one shorter and the interfaced one slightly longer. And the reason for that is that I want the interfaced one to be the one that's on the outside, right? So the outer side of the garment. Just for extra crispness, it'll just have a crisper look. And so whichever seam allowance is closer to the outside world should be the longer one. Okay, now we're gonna turn this right side out. You can use your little turn tool. I don't know if I have one here, so I'm going to just cross my fingers that I can do this. Just my fingers. No problem. It's so easy. What could be easier? There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to keep track of which is my interfaced one. It's this one on the bottom here. And I'm going to press this, kind of rolling the seam lines to the wrong side, the uninterfaced side. Oh my gosh, I have to tell you guys that we're having like this heat wave. What are they calling it? Heat dome or something like that in New York right now. And I only have a window AC unit in here, so I'm like running it between filming scenes and hoping to get it, like cool it down in here. But if you see like sweat pooling on the ironing board, don't mind me. Okay, so this is going to be the outer side. I might just put a pin in it so I remember that. Okay. All right, so next thing we're gonna do is we are going to move on to these center front pieces. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna sew this center front seam. So put these right sides together. And because Andrea did such a nice job of cutting this for me and making sure I would have the plaid matching, I'm just gonna make sure that things are aligning. So anytime you cut a plaid or a print to match, as you're sewing it, you just wanna make sure that you're aligning it. It may be slightly off, and you can see mine is at the seam allowance, but I would rather prioritize matching the plaid in this instance. And whatever is off will just get taken up in the seam allowances. Okay, now we're gonna stitch this at 5/8 of an inch. So start at the very upper edge. Okay, now we're gonna press this open. This seam is slightly curved because of the gathers, so I'm gonna put it on my cat ham here. I'm going to press this open. There we go. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna sew our gathering stitches on either side of the center front seam. It's gonna be one row of gathering stitches, 1/4 inch on this side and another 1/4 inch on this side of the center front seam. The other thing that's going to be unusual about this is that we're going to start stitching at the neckline edge and leave nice long tails there. And then we're going to come down to just above this circle. Let me put a better circle mark here for you can see it. This circle here. Just above there, and then I'm gonna back stitch, okay? I know we always say not to back stitch with your gathering stitches, but in this case, you'll see what we're gonna do next is sew the keyhole opening here between these 3 circles. So when we go to trim those seam allowances, you're gonna end up accidentally cutting off those gathering threads, and then it'll be really frustrating if you pull them and they come right out. So I'm just going to have you backstitch right here, and then we'll only pull the gathering threads from the top and they'll be locked in here. Okay, so let's go to the machine. I'm going to put it at 4 for my length. And I'm going to make sure I have nice long tails at the top, thread tails. I am going to stitch a 1/4 inch to the right side of the center front seam, and I'm using the edge of my presser foot to measure that. Okay, here's my circle. Right before, I'm going to backstitch. And you can go back and forth a couple times to really lock it in there. It's like the worst when you go to pull your gathering stitches and they pull right out of your fabric. Very annoying, especially after you've sewn the keyhole seam. So we are gonna do things just a little differently. Okay, so I have long tails again. I am now to the left, a 1/4 inch to the left of my center front seam. Got long tails at the neckline. I'm gonna do the exact same thing. When I start to see that circle coming up, I'm gonna get ready. I am going to backstitch, lock those stitches in. All right, the other thing we're gonna do is repeat those steps for the lining, which I have already done off camera. So don't pull your bobbin threads yet. We will do that after we've sewn the keyhole, okay? So in the next scene, we'll be sewing this keyhole opening, the upper edge of the keyhole opening. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to sewing the keyhole at the lower edge of the bodice, just like we did on the upper edge of the midriff, and it's gonna form this cute little diamond shape right here when they meet. So I'm gonna put this back to the side, and now we're gonna take our lining and our bodice fronts and put them right sides together. And see these circles I have here? I want to make sure that those are transferred to a wrong side, whichever side I'm going to be stitching from. In my pencil, so I can just kind of faintly see it there. I am going to transfer these wrong side. They're not that helpful from the right side right now. So, and there they are. Okay. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3. So just the same as we did on the midriff, we're going to be pivoting at the center circle, which is right at that center front seam. And we're going to start stitching at this circle, pivot, end at this circle. Okay, here we go. Make sure you're back to your regular stitch length after gathering, so 2.5. And we're doing this at 5/8 of an inch, starting right on that circle mark. Now I'm stitching towards the center front circle, and when I get there, I'm gonna pivot. There we go. Just a little pivot. And I'm gonna end at this circle mark. And I'm gonna backstitch. Okay, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to clip to each of these circles. And I'm going to grade my seam allowances so that the lining is shorter. And the dress seam allowance is longer. So just to repeat, it's almost always that the outer garment seam allowance is the longer one. Okay, and see how this can kind of start to split right here? I'm gonna go back and reinforce that real quick. I get nervous about these things. All right, let's go right here. Okay, so now we are reinforced and our seam allowances are clipped and graded. The next thing we're going to do is apply twill tape to this seam allowance. And this is to keep it sort of gripping the underboob region. That's the only way to say that, really. So we played around with putting elastic here, which you could definitely do if you're concerned with, you know, things slipping out. We put twill tape because we didn't want to see any gathering. Elastic can kind of give you a little bit of a gathered look. And this will stabilize. You can kind of pull it taut and we're going to feed the fabric through to really ease it in and then pivot at the center front. Okay, so let's go to the machine. I'm going to show you exactly how to do this. We're going to work from the lining side. And I'm going to start at one circle. And I'm going to stitch on the edge of the elastic, or not elastic, twill tape. We just went over this. Okay, there we go. I'm going to back stitch. And now what I'm going to, oops, put the needle down. I'm going to start pulling on the twill tape, and with my left hand, I'm going to be feeding the garment through. So trying to feed it through quicker and ease it in, okay? And when you get to center front, you can pivot. And same thing on this side. And I'll backstitch here. Now I can trim this away. And you can see it's slightly eased in here. And we use twill tape like this anytime we need to stabilize, and also somewhere that we may see gapping that we don't want to see, like at a neckline or an armhole. Okay, so now what we're going to do is turn the garment right side out. And just like we did on the keyhole on the midriff, we are going to turn this out at the clips. I'm going to press this lower edge. Now, the next thing we're going to do is pull up our gathering stitches. So grab a ruler, and we're going to do these separately, the outer bodice and the lining. So start with the outer bodice, and I used light pink thread in my bobbin so I can kind of tell which is which, and darker pink in my upper thread. And we're going to gather until this section measures 2 1/4 inches. From the lower circle to the upper circle here. So we're going to exclude the seam. Oh my God, did I do it perfectly on the first try? Wow, that's magical. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing on the lining. And see how backstitching on one end of my gathering stitches on the lower edge is making it so that I don't accidentally just like pull my gathering stitches out now. That's not something I do often or really ever, but it works really well for this project. Okay, so now they measure 2 1/4 inches. the outer and the lining. Don't worry about how this looks down here because that's going to be covered up with the knot and it's going to look really cute. Okay. Okay, so here is our assembled upper front bodice, outer bodice lining, sewn at the keyhole. And now we're going to sew our side seams. So you have your lining backs and your outer dress backs. So start with the outer dress. And we are going to put these right sides together and make sure that you isolate the lining here. And we are just working on the outer dress right now. Oh. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Millie, it's okay. She hears, oh, I know. Millie is not pleased. She hears strange men outside. I don't know what they think they're doing. Unauthorized behavior in Millie's neighborhood. All right, so I've pinned each side seam separately, and now we're going to stitch these. Okay, and now we are going to press these side seams open. I find this a little bit easier on a raised surface, so I'm using my ham. I just gave myself the worst burn on my finger. Part of the iron came off. This guy here came off, and I decided to snap it back on by grabbing the iron like this by the plate. Suffice it to say, that was painful. So in between scenes, I'm running the AC and also icing my finger, which feels really good today. Okay, so there is, and this is why this bodice is so weird. I'm scared of the iron now. It's so weird because we have the outer bodice and then the lining is just kind of hanging from it. And now what I'm gonna do off camera, because I want to put the AC on and ice my finger, I am going to put the lining pieces, the lining backs right side together, just like we did with the outer bodice, stitch, press open. Okay, so we are ready to work on the sleeves. I have already prepped the sleeves, and by that I mean I have sewn the underarm seam on each of the sleeves for the outer sleeves and the sleeve linings. And then the next step is to turn up the sleeve hems 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so press, use your little seam gauge, go all the way around, and you're going to turn those to the wrong side on the lining pieces and the outer sleeve pieces. So the sleeve hems are going to be bagged, which means we're going to stitch the lining by machine, but it does help when you're doing that step to see where the crease is. So that's why we did that bit of preparation there. Okay, so now I'm going to put the linings aside. We are going to set a sleeve into the bodice. So this is a raglan sleeve, and just like a set-in sleeve, it has a single notch in the front and a double notch in the back. So that will help me find the correct sleeve here. So let's work from this side. I am going to start at the underarm, matching that seam. And here you can kind of unfold the hem a little bit because we're going to be stitching in there. It's such a short little sleeve. All right, and now I'm going to match that single notch in the front. Up to the neckline. And matching the double notch in the back up to the back neckline. Okay, and now we're going to set this sleeve in by stitching around this shape here. Okay, so we're going to be stitching at 5/8 of an inch, 2.5 stitch length. Okay, and now what we're going to do is stitch again at 1/2 inch for reinforcement here, because this does get a bit of wear and tear under the arm. Going to trim next to our second line of stitching, and you can trim close. So our seam allowance is going to be about 3/8 of an inch when trimmed down. And this bodice is fully lined, so we're not going to be finishing any seam allowances. Okay, so that is one sleeve set in. And I'm going to repeat that with the other side of the outer bodice. And then again, on this strange journey we've been on of constructing the lining and the bodice separately while they're attached, we are going to do the same thing with setting the sleeves into the lining. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that the next 3 times, and then I'll come back and we'll move to the next step. Okay, so you can see that I have the sleeves set in, all 4 of them. And just to note that I pressed all of the seam allowances towards the sleeves, so on the lining and on the bodice. Okay, and now we're going to do our clean finish method at the center back to prepare for the lap zipper. So I hope this bodice is keeping you on your toes a little bit because the order is crazy. Okay, so now we're going to go right sides together. So we're going to flip this back out. And now, whenever I do the clean finish, I like to have the bodice with its back facing towards me, and then the lining right sides together with that. Okay. All right, and now the right side, as always, is going to be the underlap of the lap zipper. And we're going to put these 2 seam allowances together. And you can go to the next seam if you want to, which would be the raglan seam in the back, and just pin there, make sure that everything's aligning on this back panel. Now we're going to take both of these seam allowances, the lining and the dress, and turn them towards you, to the outside, to the wrong side of the lining, 1/2 inch. Okay, and then you're just going to pin it at the top, like so. Okay, so that's the underlap side. The left side will be the overlap of the lap zipper. So again, I'm going to pin at my raglan seam. Make sure I'm aligned at center back. And these are going to be folded separately. So the lining, I'm going to fold to the wrong side of the lining, 7/8 of an inch. Okay, like that. And then I'm going to pin at the top. And then the dress, I'm going to fold in 5/8 of an inch. Right there. And you should be seeing a 1/4 inch gap between the two. And then you can fold this. Okay, so that's going to give us our nice clean finish at center back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start stitching on this side right on the fold, and I'm going to, well, first I'm going to finish pinning right all the way around the neckline. So at each raglan seam first, at the center front, next raglan seam, and then I'm going to fill in pins between there. And then I'm going to stitch all the way around from this fold to that fold. And then I'm going to grade my seam allowances so that the lining is slightly narrower and the dress seam allowance is slightly wider, okay? So I'm going to do those steps off camera, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk about applying twill tape to the neckline, front and back, and elastic to the sleeve here to get it to grip your shoulders. Okay, so here we are with the neckline stitched. I pivoted at center front. I graded my seam allowances, and I also trimmed away at the center back points. And now we're going to be applying twill tape in sections, just like we did to the keyhole on the bodice. So the first section will be center back to raglan seam. We're going to skip the sleeve because there's elastic there. Second section will be raglan front seam to center front. And then it's a little easier on this one if you break this up into 2 sections. So then we're going to do a new section of twill tape from center front to the next raglan seam. And finally, the 4th section will be back raglan to the opposite center back. Okay, so I'm going to show you one of these. We're going to start at center back, and you can cut a length of twill tape. I have a long roll, and I prefer to just leave it on there because you don't really know how much you need until you've pulled it and eased it in. So that's just me. You can also cut, a general length and then trim away any excess. Okay, so we're starting at center back and working from the lining side. And I'm aligning the twill tape just inside the seam allowance so that the edge of the twill tape is matching up. It's flush with that line of stitching at the neckline. And I'm going to start stitching, I'm going to back stitch, and then with my needle down, I'm going to start pulling the twill tape with my right hand, and with my left hand, I'm pushing the garment forward. And then I'm going to back stitch once I get to the raglan seam. And I'm going to trim away. So there's one back section. Now let's do one center section, or we can just do them all. All right, so now we're going to start at the front raglan seam. I feel like this is the kind of thing that's helpful to see a couple times. All right, so back stitch. And again, pulling slightly on the twill tape with my right hand, pushing the garment through with my left hand. You don't want to go crazy with the pushing because you don't want to get any puckers, obviously. But we're just trying to ease it in to prevent gapping, to prevent stretching. Okay, now this one, when we get to center front, we're going to backstitch. Right there. Okay, and now I'm going to trim away the twill tape here, trim away the threads, and I'm going to start again rather than pivoting, because this will help reduce bulk. And you can leave a little excess at center front because we can always trim that away later, excess twill tape. I'm going to start at center front here, backstitch. Stitch at the raglan seam, and now we just have one section left. So yeah, let's just do them all together. All right, going to the second back section, starting at the raglan seam. Okay, so you can see that I have applied the twill tape in those 4 sections. I trimmed away any excess at center front, excess twill tape. And now we're going to do the same thing with our clear elastic, which is going to go in each of these sleeve sections. And it's pretty much the same process, except that we are going to be actually pulling the elastic to get it to really grip your shoulders. I'm just going to trim away any excess of the twill tape. Okay, so let's go to the machine. And just like we did with the twill tape, aligning the elastic so that the edge of it is flush with your stitching. I'm gonna anchor it with a back stitch, start with your needle down. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull this elastic with the right hand and feed the garment through with your left. And I really like to pull this as much as possible. I really like these shoulders to grip onto my body, so I use a lot of stretching here. And you can see how the garment is now stretching. It will give you a slightly ruffled effect, which will go away when the garment is on. You may notice that there is elastic in the sleeves, but that doesn't bother me. Okay, when we get to the raglan seam, we're gonna backstitch. And I'm gonna trim my threads, and I will trim the elastic. And see how stretchy that is now? So fun. Okay, so now we will repeat the same thing in the second sleeve, so you can see it again. Again, just trimming away any twill tape. Go. So anchoring the clear elastic in place. Here it is. I'm going to pull it. Oops, I lost it. See, this is what can happen. That's okay. We're going to lift the presser foot. Anchor again, backstitch. Now start with the needle down. That was my mistake. Okay, so now here we go. Really pulling on this clear elastic, stretching it as I sew. And then when you get to the raglan seam, you're gonna backstitch. Okay, so here you can see how much stretch the sleeves are going to have, which will really help grip those to your shoulders. All right, so next we're going to come back and we'll be understitching. All right, so the next step is to understitch. And one thing that I would recommend with the clean finish, before you can understitch, it's a good idea to clip next to your turned in seam allowances at the center back. Okay, so just next to the smaller one on the overlap, like that. And now you'll be able to turn your bodice right side out, and you'll have to work through the center, like so. Okay, and now we will understitch each side separately. As you can see, there's going to be a point where you're going to have to stop at center front and break your stitching and continue on the other side. Okay, so at center back, just turn those seam allowances right side out. On the overlap side of the zipper, you'll just have to poke that corner out, and this is how we're going to get that clean finish. See how nice that's going to be on the inside? Okay, so understitching, we are going to hold the two sides out from each other. We're going to make sure that our seam allowances are finger pressed towards the lining, and that's why I did that clip right here, because otherwise it would twist. Okay, so I'm going to start at the very edge, and the seam allowances will start right here. I'm going to keep making sure that the seam allowances are underneath my needle, and I'm stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line on the lining. So one thing that's nice to do with these Bernina is you can move the needle. So I'm just going to align the center of the presser foot with my seam, and then move the needle slightly to the left, to the right. And so that gives me something to align with to stitch in a straight line. And as I understitch, I'm just holding the two sides out from each other like this, nice and taut. And when you get to the sleeve, you're going to have to stretch it where the elastic is. So you don't want to accidentally stitch any little pleats or gathers. Okay, when I get to center front, I'm going to back stitch, break my stitching, and I'll start again on the other side of center front. When I have moved everything out of the way, there we go. It's a little awkward getting in here. There we go. Now I'm at the opposite sleeve. Now just really make sure that your seam allowances are under your stitching here. Okay, now we'll be pressing our lining to the inside and just rolling that seam line out. Again, it's a little trickier around the elastic, but you can kind of stretch it as you press. Wouldn't recommend directly pressing the elastic or holding the iron on for too long. And now you can see there's a little bit of gathers. I think it's pretty cute. Okay, so, and they'll stretch out when you're wearing the dress. The elastic is, and the twill tape is something that we added for this version. As you may know, I did a dress. It's not this exact dress. We've made quite a few changes to it for Butterick, but obviously inspired by the same Marilyn Monroe Niagara dress. I did it for Butterick. Oh, I got a stitch caught right here, so I'll go back and fix that off camera. For Butterick many moons ago, oh God, I don't even know what year that was. But I remember I had these, we pulled up the original pattern because I keep all of my like paper drafts that I did for Butterick. And I had this like long, like Microsoft Word 98, no, it wasn't 1998, notes to Butterick of how this dress was supposed to be constructed because it's so like weird, right? And what I really wanted to do was improve upon it, right? Because why do it again? Why do the same design again unless I can make it better? And so getting the shoulders to grip, adding the twill tape to prevent any gaping. And of course, one of the biggest requests I got was to have a version without the keyhole. So we're bringing that to you on the 15th of this month. So if that's something that you have wanted, it's coming, and it's really, really cute and just as sexy as the original. Okay, so there is my neckline, nice and pressed. And next we're gonna move on to the sleeve linings. All right, so we are going to sew the sleeve hem now. You can see I've already done one, and you can do this totally by machine. If that does not appeal to you, you can also just do this by hand, right? You've already turned in the seam allowances here, so you can just pin them together and then slip stitch between the layers. But I'm gonna show you how to do it by machine, which is fun if you do it right and not so fun if you mess it up. You have to be careful not to create an infinity loop. And the way to do that is you're gonna keep the sleeve lining inside the outer sleeve. And this is where it helps to have turned in the seam allowances already to help visualize it as you're doing it. Then you're gonna put these right sides together, pinch them together like that, and then go in between the layers and grab those seam allowances out and then pin here, okay? And now you can't pin around the entire hem. So I just put the one pin in there, and now we're gonna be feeding it through our machine and readjusting and just using your fingers as you go, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so we're gonna start at this underarm seam. And now, with the needle down, you're going to want to keep pulling the sleeve out, grabbing the hems, making sure they're matching, and then stitching. And you're gonna have to keep stopping regularly to keep pulling the sleeve out. So you're kind of like going in a little circle here, and you're having to pull it through as you go. And you're gonna come back to where you started. It's a cool technique. We did this in the swing coat and that wrap top. Of course, I can't remember the name of the wrap dress and top right now. Extra credit? Extra credit. Yeah, we use this technique there as well. Again, you just need to keep pulling as you go. here you can see I'm coming back around to where I started. This is where I started here. And there you go. Okay, so as I was saying, I would recommend not trimming down your seam allowances until you've double checked that everything looks good. And then you can go back in and trim them down if you like, if your fabric is on the, bulkier side. But I'm just gonna show you real quick. The next step would be to iron this hem all the way around like so until you have a nice crisp hem like this. And then if you like, you can stitch in the ditch on this little underarm seam to kind of anchor the two layers together. So that's a good idea to do. So just right in that seam line, you're going to stitch by machine. Okay, so now we have pretty much completed upper bodice and completed midriff, and the next step is to put them together. And yet again, we're going to be working separately from the lining to the dress itself. So let's start with the dress, right sides together, and this point is really important because you want a nice clean finish at the keyhole. So I'm going to be really careful to pin these together really nice and neatly, so that the finished point of each is matching the other and you don't have any weird unfinished seams showing. And then I'm going to pin all the way around this midriff seam, like so, matching any notches, seams, etc. And then on the other side of the keyhole, we're going to do the same. So again, just make sure you're folding out the lining like this, and then that point you need to start stitching exactly there. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch from one side to the other, back stitching, breaking my stitching at either side of the keyhole. Up at that crucial point I was telling you about, right here. So I want to make sure that I stitch right to this point and back stitch there. Okay, and if you look from the right side, you should have a nice finished edge right there. Okay, now we're going to continue on the other side of the keyhole. Exact same thing, paying really close attention to where we are starting. And now I'm finishing off this. Okay, so you can see that I've sewn the midriff seam on the outer dress. I have not sewn it on the lining yet, so this is still free. Now you can trim these seam allowances down if you like. You can grade them or just hold your scissors at an angle here. I'm going to trim these down to about 3/8 of an inch. Continue on the other side. Okay, and now we're going to press these seam allowances up towards the upper bodice. So like this. And you can repeat that from the right side just to get like a nice tidy press on the outside if you like. And now what we're going to do is repeat that for the lining. So you're going to put the lining right sides together, starting at that midriff point. And I'll just show you one side. Okay, so just matching all those points again. Now I'll just show you sewing one side of this from the keyhole. Again, where you start is really important. I'm sewing over these boning channels. Okay, so now you can see how nice and finished it's going to be on the inside. If this point is weird at all, you can go back in and fix it. But the next thing I would do is you can trim down these seam allowances as well if you like, and then press those upward as well towards the upper bodice. Okay, so I'm gonna do that on all of that on the opposite side of my lining. And then we're so close to being finished, we just have to insert the boning after this. So hopefully you can get a sense of how this crazy bodice is coming together. So I'm gonna do my pressing, I'm gonna clean up my table, I'm gonna finish sewing this side, and then we'll come back and talk about these boning channels. Okay, so now what we're going to do is really final finishing stuff for this video anyway. I've already inserted bones into these 4 channels, and I just have to put a tiny little bone in this one. So the way I would do that is just, I'm gonna place a bone, measure where it would go to the top, and then my seam allowance is already turned in, so I'm gonna cut it just a little bit shorter than that, so it's a little bit of wiggle room. And I'm using my Greenlee 822s, 722s to cut the bone and then just get rid of any sharp edges there. And I'm gonna finish, so one end is already finished on this bone. I'm gonna finish the other with plumber's tape, just twirling it, wrapping it around here, stretching as you go, and then fold in the top and continue, and then just smush it on here. And see, this is a good reason to never, unless it's like ½ an inch long, these little offcuts of boning are really handy to have around. Okay, so this one is only probably like 2½ inches. Okay, so now I'm going to insert this into the channel. And there we go. So I would now do a row of stay stitching at the bottom here, like we did on the rest of it, to close the bottom of the bones. You are going to create whatever bottom you're sewing this to, so whatever, in the Lemoore series. I'm probably just going to do a gathered skirt with this, so I would put on this, I would attach the skirt to the outer bodice, to the midriff, and then insert a zipper. And after that, the only thing left to do is your knot. And so this is going to just get wrapped around the center front here. And you can, what I would recommend is that you try this on and see how tight you want it to be. So if you do it really tight, you're gonna get like a super cinched look here. Your keyhole is going to appear larger. If you want it to be a little more subtle, less gathered, then you could have the knot be taller. So it's totally up to you, but I would try it on and figure out what works for you, for your body, what your preference is. And then you're going to turn in that edge and just slip stitch this here. You can also kind of tack it in place just to make sure it doesn't slide back and forth. Okay, so look how cute that is. So finished sleeves, everything is finished. I'm just going to need to sew this to my gathered skirt and put my zipper in. And then obviously you would also hand stitch your lining in place around the waistline and the zipper tape at center back. And then we're done. All right, that is it, your Niagara bodice. So I cannot wait to see what you make with this. Like I said in the intro, there are lots and lots of choices for mixing and matching in the Lemoore series. So I cannot wait to see what you do. I know you all are going to bring a lot of creativity to this pattern, and I can't wait to see. So thank you so much for sewing along with me today, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.